show our commitment to religious liberty. And on this special morning, we join in honoring those who have safeguarded our freedom through military service. Let me ask you to join in singing our opening song, "This Land Is Your Land."
Our chalice lighting and for all ages is combined, so I would like a lot of help up here. So if any of you feel like you'd like to come up and sit right here, that would be just wonderful. Thank you. Well, good morning. This land is your land. This land is my land. This land belongs to you and me. We sing this song all the time, and sometimes when I sing it, first of all, I have images in my head of many places in the United States that I've seen. And I think of wheat fields, and I think of the Grand Canyon, and I think of the Oregon coast. I think of lots of places that are really special to me. And then, when I think about this land belongs to you and me, I think about you and me, and how special. What is really, really special about this land is that we have each other. And all of you I know have what's special? Oh, well, we all have very special things, and sometimes they're very unusual, but they're all special. And we love each other, and we're special to each other. And what happens, sometimes some people, in remembering how special their loved ones are to them, they find that it's important for them to sometimes have to think about fighting a war or going out and trying to protect you and me because they love us. This happens. And when these people go out and maybe participate in a war, when they are finished, we call them veterans. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about, because Veterans Day is coming up this week, we're talking about veterans. Now, I looked veteran up in the dictionary because I wasn't really sure what that word really meant. And what I found out was that it really means it's connected to something being old. Well, when a veteran comes home, he or she is experienced. They have experienced something that maybe the rest of us haven't experienced in trying to help protect those ones that they love. And so they are old and many times very wise and know things that maybe we don't know. And so we choose to honor them on this particular day that we call Veterans Day. Now, veterans come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. I decided that I'd show you a few hats today so you could think about it. Now, the one I'm wearing is a Navy SEAL hat, and so some veterans come from the Navy. Others come from the Navy too. This is kind of an old, this hat is very well worn. And then we have Air Force veterans, and Marine veterans, and Coast Guard veterans, and we also have Army veterans. We remember them all. So today, we are going to honor those veterans who are not with us anymore, who have died, and we remember them because of the love they had for us and the concern they had for us to protect us and take care of us, because all the while they were thinking of their special loved ones while they were doing what they did. That's the main thing that they were thinking about. So we're going to light the chalice this morning in honor of those veterans who are not with us anymore, who have passed away. So I need your help. I'm going to walk around to the chalice. I need you, if you know anyone, and this is for all of us, if you have any special veteran in your life that you loved, that loved you, while I light the chalice, when I get to the point, I remember, I would like you to join me, please, in saying out loud, I remember. Now, I'm going to remember my husband, Bill, who served in the Army for many years. I especially remember the stories that he told about being a black person serving in the Army, and how that in America, many times when he was on American soil, he was not only thinking about fighting for his country, but many times he had to fight for his own rights, even while he had the Army uniform on. So that's, many times we have veterans tell us stories, and that's those are the stories that I remember a lot about the things that Bill told me. So now I'm going to light the chalice, and I want, please share with me when I get to the part, I remember. Please say the name of the loved one that comes to your mind. We light the chalice today in honor of all of our loved and special veterans who have passed away and are not with us. I remember Bill. Would you please say, I remember? It's coming. Thank you. Now, it's time for all of you who go to Sunday school to go, and the chorus will play.
I'm Jan Cook, President of the Board of Trustees. Welcome to our service. As a non-creedal church, we welcome all people into our community who seek the truth with an open mind and an affectionate heart. If you are visiting this morning, please help us to find you by placing a sprig of boxwood in your lapel. You will find boxwood in the offering basket. In addition to the church activities listed in this morning's order of service, I have the following announcements to make. Singing the Living Tradition, the new UU hymnal, is due out next spring, and we need your help to fill our church with this great book of hymns, songs, and readings capturing the spirit of our denomination. The 409 hymns and songs in this book offer something for every musical taste, from old and familiar favorites to newly commissioned works, and draw on the heritage of spirituality expressed in a variety of human cultures. The 318 readings provide a rich worship resource for our liberal faith. To make Singing the Living Tradition a reality at MVUC, we must raise approximately $6,000. You can help by purchasing one or more hymnals at the early bird pre-publication price of $25 and donating them to MVUC. Contribute a hymnal in honor of a friend or in remembrance of a loved one. Your gift of music will be used for years of Sundays. A special nameplate in the front of the volume will address.
One of the good things about a day like this is the music is so powerful. Let's sing.
You should go by the library today and open the encyclopedia to Veterans Day. It will likely tell you that until 1954 it was called Armistice Day. Now that reference will tell you all about World War I and how it ended. But that was not the beginning. To borrow a phrase from Gary Wells, Veterans Day is a transcendental event. Its philosophical underpinnings were in fact given to us by Abraham Lincoln, that quintessential non-warrior who used military force in the extremis to preserve the Union and then extended the hand of peace to all Americans. In his book, Gary Wills describes how Lincoln came to Gettysburg in November of 1863 to carry out a meticulously planned, artfully crafted political act of consummate statesmanship, redefining the Constitution. This was no extemporaneous affair. In so doing, Lincoln set the presidential cachet on a small cemetery which had been established only the year before by the Pennsylvania legislature for their own needs. "We are met on a great battlefield of that war," said Lincoln. "We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that the nation might live." Since that day, Gettysburg has come to symbolize national commemoration of our deceased warriors. And a year later, Arlington National Cemetery was opened by the Army. In his second inaugural, on March 4th, 1865, the war was nearly over. Now here again, Lincoln redefined the national purpose, looking now far beyond a certain victory. First, ever the politician, reestablishing the blame for the war on the South, and noting that both sides read the same Bible. He invoked God's help to end the carnage. "Fondly do we hope," favorite fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. An unspoken condition, of course, was a Union victory. Then in the final paragraph of this, his very last speech, Lincoln set the precedent for what would eventually become a growing theme of support for our military veterans. I think most will remember these words. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. On April 9, Lee surrendered to Appomattox. On April 15, Lincoln was dead from an assassin's bullet. During the 4 years of the Civil War, an estimated 750,000 Americans, Union and Confederate, were either killed or severely wounded and lost. Only 51 years later, hardly a single lifetime, Americans from the North and South were again fighting, this time side by side, in the war to end all wars. By the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month, 1918, 59,000 Americans had been killed. The U.S. government then set this date aside to honor the veterans of the great conflict. But in 1932, thousands of these same veterans marched on Washington demanding their promised bonuses. They lived in Hoovervilles and were forcibly dispersed by the same army in which they had served. 9 years later, our military forces were committed to the Second World War. 292,000 would be killed. 5 years later, we were fighting a police action in Korea. 23,000 would be lost. By 1965, Americans were fighting a war in Vietnam. The names of the nearly 59,000 killed are engraved on a wall of black marble within view of the Lincoln Memorial. 30 million persons have visited that commemorative site. Since then, our military forces have been engaged in Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, and the Persian Gulf. Today, an estimated 19 million American veterans are alive.
Let's rise and sing when Johnny comes marching home.
Good morning. I'm Commander
Captain-select actually now, James Swanson, and I have the great privilege this morning of introducing to you just a few of the veterans that are in the audience. I'm asking them to speak very, very briefly about their careers. Only for a couple of minutes will they share glimpses. And we're going to start out with Ken Crow, who volunteered for duty in the United States Army Air Force during World War II. He won his wings in 1943. First Lieutenant Crow piloted a B-24 bomber crew in China, Burma, and the India Theater during the next 2 years, flying 37 bomber missions. The longest of which was for 18 hours, for which he got the Distinguished Flying Cross. He actually got this twice, and also an Air Medal. Please welcome Ken Crow.
Good morning. Getting into this uniform this morning, I gained an appreciation of what it must feel like to wear a corset. Those of us who flew in the China, Burma, India Theater in World War II wore flight jackets like this. On the back were instructions. If we were shot down, someone, if they could read, might help us, lead us out to safety again. In the CBI theater, we flew the B-24 Liberator bomber, 4-engine twin-tail. I want to tell you about the first time I saw this plane. I was in Garden City, Kansas, in basic training, flying a small single-engine plane. One of these planes came in for a landing to fix an oil leak. We went out and stared at it. It was huge, immense. And as a matter of fact, at the time, it was the largest operational bomber in the world. And we had this slightly terrifying feeling about maybe being called upon to fly one of these at a certain time. Well, 2 months later, I found myself in Fort Worth, Texas, learning to fly the B-24 as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 2 months after that, I was in Walla Walla, Washington. I'd been assigned to crew, 9 men. We were practicing bombing, gunnery missions, flying formation. 2 months after that, I had my own plane assigned to me, flying halfway around the world, from San Francisco to Karachi, India. Now, this was not exceptional. Thousands of young men were doing the same thing. But for an Iowa farm boy, 21 years old, this was a heady experience. It was fraught with danger, but to be a part of all this and to carry it off did things for one's self-esteem and sense of self-confidence. It helped a young man to grow up in a hurry. Now, my combat experiences were exciting, many of them hair-raising, but they were standard. Thousands of others experienced the same thing in almost every combat operation. I have one little story that's unique to me that my family likes to hear me tell, and I'll give you just a snippet of it. A few of us were sent up from the 10th Air Force in India and up to the 14th Air Force in China. And this particular situation, we were returning from a night mission to eastern China. We were returning with just enough fuel and a little more to get back to our base when disaster struck. The radio compass antenna iced up and broke, so we were without our main navigational instrument. At the same time, the weather took a turn for the worst, and all the fields in western China were socked in, and there was no place for us to go. We pondered this. We made an attempt to let down a Kunming where we thought there might be 500-foot ceiling, and there wasn't. We almost crashed into a mountainside. We got up on top again, panic set in at our near brush with death. As to what we were going to do, my co-pilot was yelling Mayday, Mayday into the radio, which is a distress signal, and I shut him up so I could think. And I was saying to myself, where there's a will, there's a way. Our fuel was now even lower, our oxygen supply was getting low. Where there's a will, there was a way. And then I heard a little voice in the back of my mind. speaking to me, and at first I paid no attention. And I'm saying, where there's a will, there's a way. Finally, I listened to that little voice, and it was making a simple suggestion as to what I should do. Well, the rest of this story is how I followed that suggestion, and it did indeed help me get my plane, my crew, myself back to safety once again. But the question persisted, what was that little voice in the back of my mind? I couldn't relate it to any person I'd ever met. I couldn't relate it to any information I'd ever received or any experience I'd had. Nor was that was the case with my crew with whom I discussed it, my colleagues back at base. So there's been a great mystery to this day as to what that little voice was that was talking to me in the back of my mind up there that morning. It had never happened to me before. It has never happened to me since. But a curious thing is that as I've told this story off and on through the years, a question seems to form in my mind almost against my will. And it's the question is this: is it just possible? Is it just possible that that little voice in the back of my head was the voice of God?
Next is Al McCumber. Al was drafted into the Army in 1950. Because of his farm background, he was selected for training as an airfield soils technician. This in turn led to his assignment in the 809th Engineer Aviation Battalion, and he deployed to Korea in 1951. For the next 10 months, he constructed combat airfields just below the 38th parallel. He was honorably discharged in 1952.
There's a long time ago from which to recall how my military experience changed the assigned topic. What did it mean to have served the U.S. military during the time of the Korean War? Here are a few thoughts in 1992 as to what 1952 meant to me. I spent a little less than 2 years in the Army, more than half the time in South Korea. Fortunately, I never had to shoot at anyone, and no one ever shot at me. Likely because the airfields we built was some distance from the front, and the North had no air force to use against us. Vivid scenes from Korea that I should always remember include a huge, looming hospital ship in Busan Harbor when we arrived at dawn. The queues of children standing outside our mess tent waiting for scraps of food. The city of Chungcheong that had only chimney stacks and cardboard shacks when we first saw it. And villagers on the Yellow Sea so happy to get boxes of clothes that a buddy and I took to them at Christmas time, sent from my hometown in the States by my mother. I can say that the first way that the military changed my life was to add adventure. Otherwise, I would not have seen Korea or Japan. The service convinced me that I did not want a military career because individual choice was discounted and waste and destruction was considered normal. The throw it all away approach to things and
guest speaker is Lieutenant Commander Mike Romble. He's a lawyer currently in the Navy Staff Adjutante's office. However, he originally enlisted in the Marine Corps as a crypto tech and for duty in Vietnam, arriving there in July '68. He worked the classified communications from Da Nang, and he extended his tour twice. He was there for 28 months in the war zone. Mike?
I'm used to standing in front of a judge and jury. It's difficult for me to talk about things like this, so please bear with me. Like any sensitive male who was born in the 40s and grew up in the 50s and 60s, peer pressure caused me to embrace the John Wayne macho image of all the movies that we used to watch during that time period. So I arrived in Vietnam with misguided understanding of reality. Victor Charlie, the VC, Viet Cong, Charlie as we called him, liked to sit out there in the rice paddies and lob rockets and mortars in compounds. So though I was in the rear echelon, as Louis Puller would call it. My first night in Vietnam, I was rudely awakened about 2 o'clock in the morning when the air siren went off because they saw the rocket trail going up and gave us advance warning. So I grabbed the first thing and only thing I could find and scurried out into our hole in the sand that had 1 layer of beach matting over top of it. When I got my senses about me, I realized I was holding 1 flip-flop in my right hand. I had my glasses on, and other than that, I was stark naked. It can easily get up to 115 degrees in Da Nang in July. That was a regular occurrence. So your first night there, you had to sleep out in clothes just to exist. So as I sat there as I was scrunched over there in the sand with this 1 layer of this metal beach matting just an inch above my head, I started thinking, Charlie doesn't know me. He doesn't know that I have a father and a mother. He doesn't know that I have a sister at home, and they all love me. All he knows is that I'm the enemy. He wants to hurt me. So I never felt so hopeless or helpless in all my life. And that turned out to be the experience that was most impressionable for me throughout the next 28 months. Came back in November of '70, and getting back into the macho groove, my father and cousins and uncles and I went down to Camp A.P. Hill here in Virginia to go deer hunting, as we had done throughout the '60s every fall. A.P. Hill, Virginia was unique because you used to be able to hunt there for 6 weeks at a time. I don't know if you can still do that or not. So I was out on the stand early one morning before the sun came up. Had my 12-gauge shotgun with me, and as the sun started filtering through the leaves that were left and the branches, it was an extremely idyllic scene as 2 deer just sauntered up about from here to the back of the church and stopped and started grazing. I raised my 12-gauge to my shoulder. I got them in my sight. I leaned forward. I was getting ready to pull the trigger. And I remember my first night in Vietnam. So I lowered my shotgun and scared them away, went home, and never been hunting since. I could not subject another living thing to the same experiences that I had. Though there were other things that happened to me in Vietnam, I'd like to think that for the good of myself and the ecology and all the deer still down in Camp A.P. Hill, that was the most memorable.
The last one of our veterans that's going to speak today is Lieutenant Colonel Sherry DeVries, United States Marine Corps Reserve. She was commissioned in the Marine Corps in 1966. She served as a crypto custodian for the Marine Corps in the Pacific until her discharge from the reserves in 1970. However, in 1983, she was called back to assist with identification of the casualties from the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, and was active during Desert Storm, first as one of the officers who had to break the bad news to the next of kin, and finally assisting Marines being discharged with their transition back to civilian life. Colonel?
Good morning. I have a love-hate relationship with the Marine Corps. As with any institution, it has its flaws. Notably, it is a very sexist organization. However, it taught me that I can do anything I make up my mind to do. To stretch, reach, stand on my tiptoes, and do more than I ever thought possible. When I joined the Marine Corps straight out of college, I had been successful at everything I had attempted. Keyword, attempted. I didn't do things I wasn't sure I would be good at. The Marine Corps made me stretch. I was forced to do things I never thought possible. There were no excuses. You couldn't call in sick. Many days I hoped to get run over by a garbage truck on my way to work, but I never was, and I always survived the experience. The Marine Corps took a young and inexperienced person and gave me authority, but also instilled in me the lessons of responsibility that go along with authority. One's subordinates, or as we affectionately say, the troops, have very high expectations of their leaders, be they squad leaders or commanding generals. They really, really believe in you. It's a lonely feeling in a crisis situation when all eyes turn to you, knowing that the troops believe that you have a solution and will make it better. You as their leader cannot let them down. This trust is a privilege and a precious thing. This is where I learned training, preparation, and doing one's homework is mandatory. You cannot violate the troops' trust and the faith they have in you, so you must be prepared. Trust means those who lead must be the best, not only because ultimately they may have lives in their care, but also their trust and belief. The Marine Corps also gave me a sense of inclusion, being part of something with traditions, rituals, and a fairly long history. Something that makes me feel proud.
At this time, I would like to ask for all of our active duty military and all of our veterans to please stand.
Baskets of red poppies being passed among you commemorate veterans who have died in our nation's battles. This morning, they're also a symbolic gift of friendship from our veterans to all of us.